I have lived through enough downturns to know something that most people do not want to hear until it is too late. A recession is not the moment your life changes. Your life usually changes in the months before it, when you either prepare honestly or keep performing a version of normal that your finances can no longer afford. That is the first truth. Most people think recessions arrive like storms. The rain begins, the wind rises, the television voices get louder, then the danger starts. That is not how it really works. The danger usually begins much earlier, in quieter places, in the raise that gets spent before it arrives, in the debt balance that is carried one more month, because next month will feel easier, in the lease that was just a little too large, the car that was just a little too flattering, the lifestyle that kept expanding because success felt like something that should be visible. Then the economy softens, hours get cut, hiring freezes, clients hesitate, customers disappear, credit tightens. Suddenly, what used to feel like a nice life begins revealing itself as a machine with no slack in it. That is when most people say the recession hurt them. Number the recession exposed them. That is a much harder sentence. It is also a much more useful one. The source document you gave me begins there in spirit. It says a recession is not simply something that happens to you. It becomes a transfer event that rewards the prepared and punishes the exposed. The writer frames it almost like a game, and in the only way that matters, he is right. Fay file site Fay turn 47 file 0 Fay wealth has rules, clear ones. But most people were never taught the real rules. They were taught how to earn. They were taught how to behave. They were taught how to become useful. That is not the same thing as being taught how to become free. So they do what the culture rewards. They work hard. They increase the income. They reward themselves when the income rises. And because their behavior looks successful from the outside, they rarely question whether it is structurally dangerous. That is why the trap is so effective. It feels normal. I want to tell you what I have learned after watching this cycle repeat more times than most people care to count. The people who come out of recessions wealthier are rarely the ones with the hottest opinions during the recession. They are the ones who built a very different machine before it started. And that machine is not complicated. It is just emotionally difficult because it forces you to think differently than the majority around you. The source file puts it in 5 principles and then reduces them into 4 steps. I am going to give you the same core logic, but in the order I think life actually teaches it. Fay file site Fay turn 47 file 0 Fay first, understand the liquidity trap. Second, understand the debt accelerator. Third, understand the consumption identity. Fourth, design your environment instead of worshiping willpower. Fifth, protect your mind from the attention economy. And then, when you have understood those things, act through 4 steps: awareness, control, growth, freedom. That is the real recession framework, not panic, not prediction, preparation. Let me begin with liquidity, because most people still think liquidity means low ambition. That is one of the most expensive misunderstandings in modern finance. The source text tells the story of 2 people with the same income and the same starting point. One let every pay increase become a larger lifestyle. The other sat on her hands, held the lifestyle roughly still, and quietly set the extra money aside. Then the economy softened. One panicked because the life he built required yesterday's income to survive. The other began looking for opportunities because she still had margin. Fay file site Fay turn 47 file 0 Fay. That story matters because it is not rare. It is normal. I have seen that pattern more times than I can count. The public confuses a rising lifestyle with a rising financial position. Those are not the same thing. Lifestyle is consumption, liquidity is options, and in a recession, options are worth more than almost any status symbol you bought on the way in. People forget that because cash does not flatter the ego. A luxury watch flatters the ego. A nicer SUV flatters the ego. A more expensive apartment flatters the ego. Cash does not. Cash looks quiet. Cash looks idle. Cash looks as though you are not fully enjoying your success. Fine, that is exactly why cash is powerful. It does not have to look good to other people. It only has to buy you time when conditions turn. The most dangerous thing about a downturn is not simply that assets fall. It is that the people who need to act cannot. They have no cushion, no runway, no space between themselves and desperation. So even if they see the bargain, they cannot touch it. They are not investors in that moment. They are survivors. And survival mode is a terrible place from which to make wealth decisions. This is why I have always respected liquidity. Not because I do not know how to invest, because I know exactly how valuable it is when somebody else no longer has any. Cash is not just a financial position. It is a psychological one. That may be the most important part when you have real liquidity. You think differently. You do not feel hunted. You do not wake up every morning trying to solve the next bill with shrinking space. You can observe, you can wait, you can compare price with value, you can avoid stupid terms because you do not need immediate relief. That clarity is priceless in a panic. The investor with cash and patience will almost always outperform the investor with 10 clever ideas and no room to act. The file says that directly, and I agree with it completely. Fay file site, Fay turn 47 file 0. Fay, so the first hard question is this. If your income stopped tomorrow, how many months could you last? Not how many months would you like to think you could last. How many months? Honestly, if the answer is frighteningly small, then that is the real risk in your life right now. Not the Fed, not the election, not the latest market story, your lack of runway. That is the first thing a recession punishes. Now let me turn to the second mechanism. Debt, the file calls it borrowed time from your future. That is a very good phrase because most people still think debt is a number on a screen or a fixed monthly payment. It is more invasive than that. It is future labor already spoken for. Fay file site. Fay turn 47 file 0. Fay, every dollar of debt says the same thing. You already consumed the benefit. Now the future must pay for the memory. That is fine. If the debt bought an asset on sane terms that produces value over time, it is ruinous. If the debt bought transient comfort, convenience, vanity, or a version of your life you could only afford temporarily. This is where most people get hurt. Not by one dramatic mistake, by a long series of ordinary ones. A balance carried, a minimum payment normalized, a car financed at terms that assume life remains smooth, a card used for groceries because this month is tight, then another month, then another. The file gives a simple example of a $4,000 credit card balance at roughly 22% interest turning into far more money repaid over time. The point is not the exact dollars. The point is the structure. Compound interest does not only build wealth for you, it builds burden against you with the same relentless logic. Fay file site, Fay turn 47 file 0. Fay. That is what most people have never really absorbed. They like hearing that compounding is the great wealth builder. They rarely stop to feel that compounding is morally neutral. It builds whatever you feed it. If you feed it assets, it becomes a servant. If you feed it debt, it becomes a predator. And once a recession arrives, the cruelty becomes visible because income often shrinks while the debt schedule keeps marching like an occupying army. Your wages do not get a vote. Your hours do not get a vote. Your fear does not get a vote. The debt keeps charging. That is why people spiral. Not because they are weak, because the structure is merciless. I have watched intelligent, hardworking people enter downturns already bleeding from old debt they never fully confronted, and then act surprised when the downturn finishes the job. That is not cynicism. That is arithmetic. If you owe a lot, you think worse. If you think worse, you act worse. If you act worse, the situation tightens. The more you owe, the less freedom you have to think clearly. And clear thinking is one of the most valuable assets in a recession. This is why people who come out of recessions stronger are usually the ones who went in leaner, not richer necessarily. Leaner, owing less, promising less of their future to old consumption. That is why I have such affection for debt reduction as a recession strategy. It is not exciting. Good excitement is overrated in money. Debt reduction makes your future less crowded. And a less crowded future is a more intelligent one. Now let me move to the third mechanism, because this is where finance becomes psychological in a way most people never notice. The source file gives it an excellent name, the consumption identity. Fay file site, Fay turn 47 file 0. Fay, this is one of the quietest destroyers of wealth I have ever seen. At some point, often without noticing, people stop using purchases as tools and begin using them as proof. The car means something, the apartment means something, the neighborhood, the clothes, the vacations, the phone, the dinners, the furniture, the visible signs that say, I am doing well. What begins as consumption becomes identity. That is when the danger starts, because once an expense becomes identity, cutting it back no longer feels like prudence. It feels like self-erasure. It feels like becoming smaller. It feels like admitting decline. That is why otherwise sensible people will fight harder to preserve a lifestyle signal than they will to preserve their future options. This is not because they are uniquely foolish. It is because the consumer economy is engineered to attach self-worth to spending. The file says this plainly. Advertising does not merely sell products. It sells identity, belonging, and status. It tells people that buying this or that makes them a certain kind of person. Fay follow site, Fay turn 47, file 0, Fay, of course it does. That is the business. And if you never step outside that spell, your income can rise for years without your wealth ever meaningfully improving, because every raise gets converted into a more expensive costume. I have lived in the same house since 1958. I paid around $31,500 for it. That fact has been repeated so often people think it is eccentricity. It is not eccentricity. It is insulation. It is what freedom looks like when your identity is not tied to proving your current economic class through your monthly spending. The file points to my house, my car, and even my breakfast habits to make exactly that point. When your self-worth does not depend on maintaining a visible performance of success, recession has much less emotional leverage over you. Fay file a site, Fay turn 47, file 0, Fay. That is a deep truth. The more your identity depends on visible consumption, the more fragile you become in any downturn. Because now you are not only defending cash flow, you are defending self-image. That is expensive, that is exhausting, and that is why the recession hurts some people twice. They lose money and, in their own minds, social standing. Now let me tell you the fourth mechanism, environment architecture. This is the one, the modern self. Help world gets wrong all the time because it worships willpower far too much. Willpower is real. It is also unreliable. You can be disciplined at 9 a.m. and tired at 8 p.m. You can be focused on Monday and weak on Thursday. You can be serious in January and sloppy in March. That is what makes willpower such a poor soul foundation for wealth building. The file says the same thing and says it well. Lasting discipline is usually not built on constant heroic effort. It is built by designing an environment where the right choice is the easy choice. Fay file a site, Fay turn 47, file 0, Fay. That is exactly right. If your paycheck lands in checking and waits there, much of it will eventually leak away because the structure invites leakage. If your savings move automatically before you see the money, the structure invites preservation. That is a massive difference. The same human being behaves differently in two different systems. That is why I care more about systems than about moral intensity. A person with mediocre discipline and excellent structure often outperforms a person with high intentions and no structure. That is one of the least glamorous and most useful truths in personal finance. Automation matters, defaults matter, friction matters. What is easy? What is hard? What requires a decision each week and what was decided once at the system level and now runs quietly in the background? That is architecture. And the social environment matters too. The source file makes this point well. The people around you shape your financial behavior more than most spreadsheets ever will, because humans mirror norms. If your reference group spends everything it earns and treats future thinking like deprivation, you will feel strange for acting differently. If your reference group thinks in years, talks about building, and respects delayed gratification, you will drift in that direction too. Fay file site, Fay turn 47, file 0, Fay. This is why your environment is a hidden balance sheet, not only the software. The people, the rooms, the voices, the emotional baseline of the community around you. Do your friends normalize debt? Do they normalize luxury? Do they normalize panic? Do they mock boring good behavior? Do they worship risk without understanding structure? Do they think prudence is fear and spending is success? These are not little things. They are invisible taxes or invisible subsidies. Depending on which kind of people surround you, you cannot build a durable financial life in an environment that is constantly selling you the opposite of what you are trying to become. That is why the fourth principle matters so much. Good systems and good people make discipline cheaper. Now let me turn to the fifth mechanism, because this is where the 2026 context becomes especially dangerous. Attention. The file calls it the attention economy tax, and I think that is one of the sharpest phrases in the whole piece. Fay file site, Fay turn 47, file 0, Fay. Most people think media extracts time. It extracts something more valuable than time. It extracts clarity. Every platform profits from your attention. And the fastest way to capture your attention is not calm analysis. It is fear, urgency, shock, dread, something that compels you to keep watching. That is why, in downturns, the informational environment becomes one of the most financially dangerous places in the world for an undisciplined mind. The louder the headlines get, the more people confuse reactivity with intelligence. They sell because selling feels like action. They buy because some commentator made the buying feel immediate. They refresh, compare, doom scroll, talk themselves into narratives, and end up making permanent decisions under temporary emotional pressure. The file is exactly right here too. The damage of fear media is not simply that it scares you. It taxes your judgment. It removes patience from your decision, making it erodes confidence in your own process. Fay Filocyte, Fay Turn 47, File 0 Fay. That is a huge cost. And it is one reason quiet investors so often outperform louder ones. Not because silence is magical. Because clarity is scarce. When markets fall, the person who can return to fundamentals rather than to headlines gains an enormous advantage. What is the business worth? What will it likely be worth in 10 years? Has the underlying economics changed? Or has the crowd's mood changed? Do I need to act? Or do I merely feel compelled to act? Those are very different questions. And the recession investor who can still ask them calmly is operating in a very different psychological universe from the one who is watching every headline like it is a command. This is why I care so much about turning off noise, not as a spiritual gesture, as a competitive one. The quieter your mind, the better your judgment when the crowd gets loud. Now let me put the pieces together. Liquidity trap, debt accelerator, consumption identity, environment architecture, attention economy tax. That is the real pre-recession map. If you understand those 5 things, then the 4 steps at the end of the file stop looking simplistic and start looking inevitable. Step 1 is awareness. See clearly. This is always the hardest step because clear seeing is emotionally expensive. The file says to sit down and build the full picture. Every monthly expense, every debt, every interest rate, every subscription, every automatic charge. Then ask the only question that matters first. If my income stopped tomorrow, how many months could I last? If the answer is less than 6, that is the priority. Fay Filocyte, Fay Turn 47, File 0 Fay. That is adult thinking. Not optimizing around the edges, not pretending seeing. Most people avoid awareness because awareness forces the next conversation. If you know the answer, then excuses become more difficult. If you know you would last 6 weeks, then you cannot keep treating your lifestyle as if it were harmless. If you know the debt is eating you, then you cannot keep calling it manageable simply because the minimum payment still technically clears. If you know the subscriptions, meals, upgrades, and recurring leaks are stealing your runway, then you cannot keep pretending the real problem is only the economy. Awareness is painful because it strips away the flattering story. Good. The flattering story never paid anyone. Bills anyway. Now comes step 2, control. The file says once you see clearly, you align your systems with your goals. Automate savings. Automate investment contributions. Remove friction from good behavior. Add friction to bad behavior. Attack the highest interest debt first. Fay Filocyte. Fay Turn 47 File 0 Fay. That is exactly the right order. Control is not mood. Control is architecture. It means the right things happen, even when you are tired, even when you are stressed, even when the headlines are screaming, even when you would rather not think about any of it. That is why control matters so much more than raw motivation. Motivation is a weather pattern. Control is engineering. And engineering beats weather in most serious systems. Then comes step 3, growth. This is the part people misunderstand because they think growth begins when the recession starts. The ability to harvest in a downturn is built before the downturn arrives. The file says this clearly. When good assets go on sale, that is where prepared people move. But they can only move if emergency funds are in place, debt is reduced, and cash exists. Otherwise, they become the people forced to sell. That is how wealth transfers in recessions. Fay Filocyte, Fay Turn 47, File 0 Fay. That sentence is one of the most important in the whole document. Wealth transfer, a recession is not only an economic event, it is an ownership event. Assets move from weak hands to strong hands, from overextended lives to liquid ones, from people who needed the market to stay cheerful to people who expected someday it would not. That is why preparation matters so much more than prediction. You do not need to forecast the exact month. You need to avoid becoming the one who is forced. Finally, step 4, freedom. This is where the file becomes deeper than a lot of ordinary financial advice. It says money is not the goal. Freedom is systems working. Decisions made from clarity rather than desperation. The ability to experience a recession as an opportunity instead of only as a threat. Fay Filocyte, Fay Turn 47, File 0 Fay. That is exactly right. I have known people with immense wealth who were still not free because they built lives that required permanent maintenance. And I have known people with far less who were deeply free because they designed their structure well. Freedom is not only a number, it is a relationship. Do you serve the money, or does the money increasingly serve the life? That is the real question. Now let me tell you what I think most people miss about the 2026 recession conversation. The recession itself is not the most interesting part. The most interesting part is who will enter it asleep. The source file closes on this beautifully. It says the wealth gap that forms in recessions is not created during the recession. It is created in the quiet months before, in the small, unglamorous decisions about savings, debt, honesty, and preparation. Fay Filocyte, Fay Turn 47 File 0 Fay. That is absolutely right. The recession is the unveiling. The real wealth divergence began much earlier. In the months someone chose to keep the lifestyle modest instead of rewarding every raise. In the months someone killed the card balance rather than carrying it like a private tax. In the months someone built a cushion instead of buying a nicer version of temporary comfort. In the months someone automated the good behavior before the panic arrived. That is where the difference was born. Not on the day CNBC became dramatic, and that is why I am not nervous in the way the public usually means nervous. I respect recessions. I do not worship them. I do not fear them the way the unprepared fear them, because preparedness changes the emotional meaning of the same event. The person with no cash hears recession and hears danger. The person with margin hears recession and hears repricing. The person with debt hears recession and hears suffocation. The person with freedom hears recession and hears selection. Same economy, different balance sheet, different mind, different outcome. So here is the final choice. You can keep treating recession as a future headline that will either happen or not happen, and then improvise when it does. That is what most people will do. Or you can do the harder thing. You can look directly at the numbers, at the debt, at the burn rate, at the identity spending, at the noise entering your mind, at the systems you have or still have not built, and then you can prepare before urgency starts negotiating on your behalf. That is the difference between surviving a downturn and harvesting one. Not genius, not luck, preparation. And if you do that honestly enough, then the next recession may not be the thing that breaks your confidence. It may be the thing that reveals how much stronger your structure had quietly become while everyone else was still performing normal.